I look at the traditional successes and what I would call traditionally failures as the same level of success.
You're going to have to explain that.
So when I'm able to help someone see that the reason that they're miserable in their business is because 75% of their clients are not their best fit clients. They've just been saying yes out of fear or desperation. And they end up firing all those clients and cutting their income by 75%. I see that as a win because it opens up the space for them to only have best fit clients.
Are you feeling overwhelmed, stuck, or uncertain about how to grow your business without sacrificing what really matters most? Welcome to The Business You Really Want, the show for women ready to build a sustainable, fully aligned business. Aligned with what, you ask? You, your values, your life. Seriously, it is possible. I'm Tonya Kubo, and along with business advisor extraordinaire Gwen Bortner, we're here to show you how. Not all business fails are true losses, which is the topic of today's show. If you've ever felt trapped by your own success or wondered if there could actually be courage in stepping backward, keep listening. Gwen, one thing I love about what we do here is call out the sacred cows that give spoiled milk. Those industry-wide accepted truths that are actually false more often than not. Now, while we often hear news of closing businesses, layoffs, or constraining growth as negatives or signs of failure, that is not always the case. In fact, both of us have experienced personally and with clients where the opposite was true. Those supposed losses turned out to be actually big wins. I'm hoping you can kick us off with an example from your experience.
So, it's interesting. There are dozens and dozens of examples that we have seen, at various levels and various types with our clients. But I'm going to start off because as we were kind of prepping, I gave you a story that you're like, I don't even know about this story. So I'm going to start with a story about me.
Yes, our whole relationship is a lie because I did not know about this.
Because as I told the story and I said, yeah, this is probably 1990. She's like, oh yeah, I'm not even out of high school yet. So a lot is related here, right? To all of these things. And it was back 1990. I was, I had my own business. I was a custom computer programmer working on PC programming. And I had been, doing it out of my house back in 1990. Yes. So when people say, oh, I've worked from home for a long time, most of you have not worked from home as long as I have.
Okay. I just have to know though, but were you doing it out of your mama's basement?
I was not doing it out of my mama's basement. It was out of my own house.
Okay.
I did have my own house at that point. Well, at first though, it was actually out of my apartment. I did not have a house yet. So, and I wanted to feel legitimate. Okay. Ooh. And so I rented a very small office. It was basically a one person office. It quite honestly probably wasn't a whole lot bigger than the room that I use for my office in my house now. And I also had hired a subcontractor employee. It was like my first, employee. And so business, was technically going well. And so I had this office. Well, what ended up happening over time, what I discovered, this was a very long process, was my lovely employee was actually stealing fax machines and computers from your alma mater and selling them as used equipment out my back door during completely off hours, obviously when I was not there. Now, the reason I was able to find out about this is because I bought one of these pieces of equipment and the campus police had started to figure out who this person was, and they reached out to me. And, and so I talked to them and I said, well, I bought this piece of equipment, and they were able to do this. Like, oh yeah, no, that's one of the stolen pieces. So of course I had to turn it back in because it was stolen goods. Well, I then was able to share a couple folks that I know he had talked to about this, but I only had a name. Like, I didn't have any detail because it was not being sold through my business, right? He was doing this as an independent person, which I was okay with until I realized what he was doing. And so they went to that person, found out that he had stolen equipment. They repossessed the equipment. So that guy went after me in small claims court for the money that he gave in cash at night at the back door. Right. I mean, like, he even admitted that in court, and I still had to pay the $800 or whatever it was, which at that time was a lot of money, back to him, even though I never ever saw it. Like,
okay, hold on. So you lost the case.
I lost the case.
Talk about burying the lead here. You lost the case.
Because I did the right thing, right? No good deed goes unpunished, right? So I lost the case. In the meantime, of course, obviously, I stopped paying. He stopped showing up as soon as he realized that he was going on. And I realized I can't afford to be paying for this space. And so I downsized back down to just me working at home, doing all the things. And the business was so much more successful. Now, just because I know you'll care, I later helped the police catch him because I saw him hanging out. I saw his car at the mall, figured out where he was. I had one of my friends go spy to see if he was where he was. And then we told him and they caught him.
Okay, good. Did you ever get your $800 back? I have questions.
No, not a chance.
No, $800
not
back.
a chance. But it was one of those that I had grown because that was what everyone said I should do. I should grow. And very quickly, I compressed back down, and I would have been better off if I hadn't have grown in the first place.
Okay, so small claims court aside, criminal activity aside, why, looking back kind of with that, business operations hat on, why would staying small have been better?
Because I wouldn't have had the expense of the lease payment and, any of the other, I don't remember what all my expenses were. I may have had electric that went with it, which probably wasn't that big at the time. But just the lease payment. And it wasn't a big giant payment. Like I said, it was a small office. This was back in the 90s. It was probably only a few $100s every month that I was paying. But I could have been putting that in my pocket. I never had a legitimate client come to that office. Not once. Because I always did my work by going to their office and taking floppy disks, right? Back at the time, right? Taking floppy disks and installing the programs that we had written and training them at their space and on their computer. I didn't need an office, but I thought I did because that's what everyone said will make you legitimate. It'll do all of those things. And all it did was cost me money. I mean, it ended up costing me way more money than it actually cost me for reasons that no one could have ever really predicted in, normal circumstances. But there was at least several $1,000s of lease payments that I could have avoided by not doing this. And it really didn't get me anything at all.
Well, and this, I think, brings us to the next point, which is really this societal pressure that comes with entrepreneurship, right? That, society always has, probably always will, equate bigger with better.
Yes.
And it's so hard as a business owner not to fall into that trap of believing that all growth is good growth, that, everybody you see on social media announcing the expansion of their business, opening up a new location, their first 7-figure year, their first 6-figure year, whatever it could be, are all successful, right? Because that seems like a measure of success. And then, of course, nobody talks about when they have to shrink back, right? That's always kind of hidden under the surface, or they'll talk about it after the fact, like when they're a phoenix rising from the ashes. How do you feel like this keeps business owners stuck in unsustainable situations?
Well, because we don't consider an alternative like giving up the office space early enough. We get stuck in saying, oh, but I really need this, right? We've had another client who expanded their business. They did this before they started working with me. I would have told them from the get-go, do not expand the business in the way that they were talking, expanding the business, but they expand and they have a physical brick and mortar. Like they actually have to have a physical location for what they do. But they went from probably what was a right size space to a much, much bigger space because the story that they get sold, that everyone gets sold, is if you have a bigger space, you can sell more. That's not necessarily true. You just have more inventory. That doesn't mean you'll have more customers buying more things. And so they went into this much bigger space, which had a whole lot of various extra things and whatnot. And as we have been working together over time, we've realized some of this space they really cannot afford. There is no way that they can afford to have the space. And they don't need it. They don't need it to run the business. And so they've gone through the process recently of, negotiating with their leasing agent to give up a chunk of the space so that they can get their finances right-sized. But we had to do a lot of work before they could mentally get there because they felt like this was, a negative activity. And it's like, I'm going backwards. And it's like, yes, you're going back to where you should be. It's kind of like, if you're running in the ocean and you're like, I'm just going to run in the ocean. And what you're running toward is the Jaws with his mouth open. Running backwards is actually a good idea, right? Not all forward momentum is the right momentum. Sometimes we need to stop and reevaluate, but a lot of times we wait until we're, practically in Jaws' mouth, and then we're like, we can't get away. And it's like, yeah, but that thing looked like a shark way, 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 way sooner.
Yeah, well, I'm curious of all of that, because like you said, it took a while to mentally get there. What was that journey like? Because I think that would be really helpful for other business owners because first of all, the thing is, it's a hard sell. It's a hard sell for us. It's a hard sell to others. So how did that thinking process go? Take us like from here to there.
Well, the first thing I want to say before I actually answer that question, and we'll put this link in the show notes, but this is a classic example of what Annie Duke talks about in the book, Thinking in Bets, where she talks about separating the decision from the outcome. So good decisions can have good outcomes and bad outcomes. Bad decisions can also have good outcomes and bad outcomes. And so I think the thing that we struggle with is when we've instinctively know we actually made a bad decision based on new knowledge, not necessarily old knowledge. So old knowledge being the knowledge you had when you made the decision. Was it actually a bad decision then? No, maybe it wasn't. But now we have new knowledge. And now we realize, oh gosh, given that new knowledge, that was a bad decision. But we don't want to own that because then we think of it as a bad decision. And so that means I'm stupid, I'm, incapable, I don't know what I'm doing, all of that negative self-talk that comes in. And so, in this particular case, the information they had, the advice they were given, all of the things, the decision itself at that time was a good decision. There was no reason for them to believe it was going to be a bad decision. Now, in this case, part of it was they got bad advice.
Right.
Okay. But how would they know that was bad advice? Right. Once they realized it was a bad decision, it was like, well, if I make a change, then I'm admitting I made a bad decision.
Right.
I was like, no, that was actually a good decision. it's got a bad outcome. And to make it again today, it would be a bad decision. And the thing that they forget is that by not taking action on it today is actually now making a bad decision. Right? Because we now have new information. We should make a new decision. But we think that whatever decision we've made, we have to live with. And I think that's the mental process and exercise that people are going through, is often the decision they make at the time really wasn't a bad decision, but later it feels like a bad decision because we have more information that there was no way for us to have before that moment. And so then we beat ourselves up, and the beating ourselves up prevents us from making a new decision.
Right. And so, there's other examples of this, I think, with closing a business. We started this show talking about sort of what we were seeing in the marketplace, where people were, shutting down their businesses, coming back up, sometimes building the same business a second time. But, the fact that they weren't really talking about the closure decisions when they were happening, right? It was only when they were ready to relaunch or whatever that they would talk about them. Give me some examples from your experience where closing a business was a good decision versus a bad decision, or maybe a sign of winning versus a sign of losing.
So there are a variety of examples, but the kind of the common theme is we are at a different season, whatever that different season is, than when we started the business. Okay. So the classic example is, I started the business before we have a family. Now we have a family. Or I started the business when the kids were little and now they're not. Or I started the business when the kids were in school, but now we're empty nesting. Where there's been time between this season and next season. And sometimes it's a relatively short time, could be 2, 3, 4 years. Sometimes it's a long time, could be 10 or 15 years. And what we realize is this is no longer doing what it needs to do for me as an owner. It's taking time that I want to put someplace else. And so I choose to close the business. And often we want to sell the business, but sometimes the business isn't sellable for all sorts of reasons. Could be timing of the market, could be the type of business that it is. There's a whole bunch of things there. But it could be that's like, no, I'm closing the business. I can't tell you how many years ago it was now, but when I was in my knitting world, there was a gal who had a yarn shop business that technically could have been sold. Absolutely 100% could have been sold. It was profitable. She'd had it for years. It was in good location, blah, 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 blah. But she absolutely opted to close the business because she felt strongly. She was done with this stage of her life, and she didn't want the name associated with anyone other than her. And so she chose to close it instead of sell it. Like I said, she could have sold it. I have zero doubt she could have sold it, but she chose not to. She said, no, I'm going to close the business. And it was a great example of, I'm at a different stage. I know why I'm doing this. I'm not going to feel bad about it. I am not going to be a failure. I'm not seeing myself at any of these things. Life has changed.
Okay, so that's an example of closing. What about laying off team members?
So this one's always hard, particularly with the people I work with, because they tend to be strongly empathetic. And it's like, oh, I'm doing something horrible to another person. Well, not always the case. A lot of times what you're doing is you are releasing them out into the wild to find another opportunity where they can be super, super successful. But they're no longer super successful with you right now. And we've had this happen with multiple clients, but what I'm thinking of, where it was someone who helped them get the business started. They're like, oh, but they helped me get it started, and it's all of those things. And it's like, yeah, but the job that you hired them for no longer exists in this business. And so they're not actually being successful for you. And so we need to release them out to the wild to find another job that they can be successful at. But there's always this like, oh, but I'm firing them. I'm laying them off. I'm letting them go. Whatever, term, is appropriate and they're using it. And it's like, and they're good people. And it's like, if they're good people, they're not going to have a problem getting another job.
Right.
Let's be honest. That's really the truth of it. And so when they finally got to it, what ended up happening is lots of tears, lots of upsetness for about 24 or 48 hours. And like, I think within less than a week, they had another job that they were really excited about, that they were going to be headed off to. Right. And so that shrinkage allowed for things to be reconfigured to then allow for new growth. Right. And I think the same thing happens with sometimes in our shrinkage of our business with clients, where we have a whole set of clients. And I think this happens a lot early on. We say yes to a lot of things that are not necessarily optimal long-term, but we want them to, we want to say yes to the client. Someone wants to hire us and we want to say, yes, we will work for you. And then over time, we realize it's not a good fit for any of a dozen reasons, right? It's really not our core offer. It's no longer the thing that we're best at. We don't really enjoy doing it anymore. They're not a good fit client. There are certain, activities, behaviors, whatever, that they're not a good fit. There's any of a dozen reasons why we may need to shrink our clients down, which will undoubtedly shrink our business, so that we can make space for the good fits and for the things that really do fit and are the type of work that we want to do going forward. But what ends up happening, and this was how I think we started the business, not the business, but the podcast way back when, was so many people needed to do that. But instead of trying to do it strategically, they just burned it to the ground and started over.
Yeah.
And that is not the only option.
Yeah.
That is not the only way to do it. There are lots of ways to do this, but you also have to be prepared. It's going to screw with your income. It's it's going to make some changes there, but often the other side of that particular dip is way higher than where you came in at.
Yeah. Well, and, one example from my own business is back in, prior to 2020, most of my work and my really steady income came from running book launch teams. And, I would be running usually 20 to 30 launch teams per year. Great income, kept me busy. I was not enjoying it toward the end there, but it was reliable. It was easy to market. It was easy to sell. Everybody was like, oh no, this is the wave of the future. And so I stuck with it. Well, then the pandemic hit and a lot of publishers pushed pause on projects. And so kind of like all of my clients hit pause. And it was during that time of 2020. Now we did end up launching maybe 3-4 books that year. But it helped me to go, okay, I'm not really loving this. This is why I don't love it. And one of the reasons I didn't love it is in the time that I had been running launch teams, the market shifted from publishers paying launch team managers to then publishers requiring authors to pay launch team managers, which minimized the amount of money you could charge, but also just unfairly added risk to the author, right? Authors already very rarely earn out their books. So to have the author pay a bunch of money toward a launch team didn't make sense. And so that period of time in 2020 where technically some would say, oh, Tonya lost all her clients, it was the best thing that could have happened for me because it was a great way to pivot my business and not have to fire clients, right? They were grateful. They were so grateful not to have the financial liability to me. And I was able to give them great advice on how to redirect those funds differently.
Right. That whole failure is okay. And, I also have any number of success stories that we can talk about that would be more traditional successes. But the thing is, I look at the traditional successes and what I would call traditionally failures as the same level of success.
You're going to have to explain that.
So when I'm able to help someone see that the reason that they're miserable in their business is because 75% of their clients are not their best fit clients. They've just been saying yes out of fear or desperation. And they end up firing all those clients and cutting their income by 75%. I see that as a win because it opens up the space for them to only have best fit clients. I mean, I had one of these several years ago that this was the thing. She came to me and she had this really nice, solid, 6-figure business. And by the time we had done most of our work, it was barely hitting 6 figures, if not under 6 figures. But it opened up the space for her to only say yes to those perfect fit clients. And, in the following year, a couple things happened. One was she had a whole lot of just bizarre, weird personal things that she had to deal with. And if she would have had that on top of all of these less than optimal clients, I'm not sure mentally she would have made it, quite honestly, because just too much. So because she was able to mentally deal with all of this other personal stuff she had to deal with. And as she came out of that, she was prepared to only take her best fit clients. And she is in a really awesome place now. She is so excited about who her clients are, what her business is, who she's working with. All of the love and joy that she had when she started the business has completely regenerated back into the business. But I consider being able to help her go down to this, I'll say barely surviving business. I actually consider a win as well, because that's actually way harder to do than to help someone, double their business, triple their business, 10x their business, whatever.
What is harder?
Do the hard thing, the truly hard thing, because it's what they really want, but are afraid to say, right? We've done the same thing with other clients who the really hard thing is, I don't actually need to make money. And what I really want to do is spend time with my children. To be okay with, then let's not have the business now. Right? But that doesn't meet normal society standards of what success looks like. But if your true definition of success is spending quality time with my children while they're under the age of 18, then why are we working at building a business that's going from taking 30 hours a week to 40 to 50 to 60 to 80 hours of your time? We're not actually moving you toward success. We're actually moving you toward failure. But in this case, moving the business to shutting is actually a movement to success. But it's back to, we define success differently.
Right.
And part of the way we define it differently is I don't define it at all for you.
How does that work?
Ask the question differently.
Well, you said part of how it works is that we don't define success for you. And so, well, hold on. What I'm trying to understand is, we don't define it for you, which oftentimes means it's defined by society, but society is sending this kind of toxic message. So how do we make that shift, right? To get clear into what I really want without somebody else defining it for me.
This is why I don't ever expect us to do short work with our people. Now, we've talked about it before. I have no minimum contract, because if they don't feel like they're getting what they need, I don't want them to stay, working with me. I'm completely okay with that. And at the same time, I also know and I'm going to use it's not probably appropriate, but deprogramming what society has defined as success takes time.
It's like de-coaching.
It is. It's like, it's like the anti-coaching. And so helping ask really hard questions to say, okay, you're saying that you want this. Tell me why you want this. And being able to have enough conversation with it to say, yeah, you're saying that, but I'm not buying it.
Mm-hmm.
You're saying that because that's the easy answer. So let's go into it more. Tell me why that easy answer is your real answer. And usually what we discover is I can't really tell you why I want that answer because it is the easy answer. It's what I've been told I'm supposed to want. Right.
Yeah.
And I know we've shared it before. One of my clients from a number of years ago, she wanted to be a top litigation attorney. And because I happen to know her personally, it was like, this makes zero sense to me. There's nothing about your personality that says top litigation attorney. Not that there's anything wrong with being a top litigation attorney. That's great if that's really, really who you are and what you want to do. It was like, I'm not convinced that's right. And part of what we were dealing with that, kind of deprogramming is we always associate the most successful attorneys with litigation. Even though there's a bazillion types of attorneys out there that can be very, very successful. But that's what we associate with success is litigation. But there was almost nothing about litigation other than she's really good at arguing a point. There was almost nothing about litigation, all of the other stuff that goes with litigation, the paperwork, the filing, the back and forth. There was almost nothing about that she was good at or liked doing. Almost nothing. And so once we finally broke through that, which took a long time, quite honestly, to undo that, to help her figure out where else could you be successful. Once she found the area that she was successful, which by the way made way more, when she stumbled on it, it was like, oh, that's it. Because it matched her personality so much better, right? Which in this case was estate planning and trust and creating trust. Because what she's great is the relationship with people and making people feel at home and comfortable so fast. What a great skill to have with trust and estate planning. Right? Made perfect sense. And her business became so much more successful. But we had to undo. And what she really wanted was she also had kids. She wanted to be able to spend time with kids. Litigation causes really weird hours and you have this control over what you're doing. She hardly ever has to go to the courthouse for estate and trust planning, right? Hardly ever. So if she wants to take a day and go, be the chaperone for her kids, event at school, she can do that, right? That so much more flexibility. So the success, once we got to what real success was, we were able to do that. But a lot of people would say, oh, but she gave up some really big, important clients. Yeah, but they were also a pain in the butt.
So it sounds like to me, there's two sort of challenges that any business owner would face in making these decisions. Part of it is just that societal pressure, like you said, right? Like in the case of the attorney, everybody's like, oh, but you would have gotten these big clients. You probably would be making so much more money as a litigator than you are now. So there's that piece. But the other piece, I think there's also a psychology component. So some things that I heard you say is, there can be an ego attachment to business size or business complexity, right? I think sometimes we enmesh our identity and our self-worth in with our business.
Sometimes you think sometimes is the appropriate amount? I would say most times. I can't quite say always because I'm sure there's an exception, but it's probably really close to always.
Okay, so always. So there's the ego attachment to business size and complexity. You talked a bit about that sunk cost fallacy that keeps you invested in what's very obviously to most people not working, and yet still we're in complete denial. there's the fear of judgment from peers and other people in the industry. But I think a lot of times it's like, but what will my competitor think? Or, what will so-and-so think? And then there's the imposter syndrome that you pointed out in the one example of, that feeling that regardless of what you actually want, you should want something else.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the psychology piece. So if there's a business owner listening who's like, oh yeah, that I didn't know that's what I needed to do, but yeah, I need to make some cuts. I need to do some trimming. What could you tell them to expect to happen when they actually start making these moves?
What I have seen again and again and again, and this is kind of woo, and I can't define it and I can't explain it. So and I can't say I've seen it exactly the same way and 100%, but man, I see it so much. And that is the first thing that'll happen is it'll be really hard, and everybody wants to scramble back to whatever their comfort zone is. And their comfort zone is whatever I was doing before. Even if it didn't make me happy, it's still, the comfort zone. I get this quote wrong all the time. Nick uses it, and I can't remember the gal's name, but it's around the idea of uncertainty versus the certainty of uncomfortableness. It's like, I'd rather be miserable, the certainty of misery, than the uncertainty of the possibility. I would rather be miserable and know what's going to happen than take the risk. To take the risk, to try the new thing, to do the thing that needs to move forward. That is the first thing we have to deal with. And so we get into this very uncomfortable place, and the first thing we want to do is regress. But if we can stay in the uncomfortable place, the next thing I see happen is the universe will dangle something that represents the comfortable place in front of you. You will get, as soon as you clear out 2 or 3 of your really bad clients, the universe will dangle another bad client in front of you with a giant price tag attached to it. Whatever that thing is. And it's like, oh, I've got to say yes. And I always feel like it's the universe saying, are you serious? Are you serious about making the change? I'm testing to see, are you serious about making the change? If you can resist the temptation, which is really what it feels like, if you can resist the temptation, almost always, it sometimes takes longer than others, all of the right things start showing up. Right? But that temptation piece is that. And as soon as we get there and if we bite, then we've got to start the whole process over again. Right? And so that is the hardest piece. And thinking back to the attorney client, once she made the decision, there were a couple things that fell in, and I kept saying, no, the answer is no. Oh, but they're good friends. Oh, but they're this. Oh, but they're that. And it delayed her making the process probably by another year, even though it was only 1 or 2. It wasn't like there were dozens and dozens and dozens of these. She still had some that she had that were already in process that she had to finish. Wasn't talking about that, but it was the new thing here, the new thing there. Finally, at one point, she said, yeah, I had him come in. And I said, no. And it was like, yay. And very soon after that, all of a sudden, the floodgates kind of opened on the other work. Because up till then, she's like, I'm not getting very many. I'm not getting very many. I'm not getting very many. And then a few other things shifted. She had a couple different opportunities, a couple kind of PR situations that just opened the floodgates once she did not take the bait. And that's just one example. I've seen it again and again and again and again.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for sort of wrapping a bow around that for us. So if you're listening, I think this has been really eye-opening for me, because as much as I knew about a lot of these scenarios, hearing them all presented in like a single package has been really enlightening, because that's when you see how much these psychological factors play in and how much other people's opinions of what we do and how we do it really do skew our own thinking on what we need to be doing to move forward. So if you're feeling trapped by your own business success or wondering if it's time to make some strategic subtractions, I bet Gwen has something to say about that.
I do. And this is why I call my work advisory work. Because I'm coming in like a board of advisors, like a board of directors, and I'm actually bringing in outside perspective that doesn't really have any skin in the game. So I can give you a much more impartial version, but I still care about your outcome. And that's what you really need in these kind of situations, is that ability to have someone with outside perspective, but without so much skin in the game that it's skewed. And I think that's where a lot of people struggle with it, is they're getting skewed perspective on what's coming in, and that outside perspective and the ability to ask the hard question. I've had more than one clarity call, which I know is what you're going to invite people to do, where I've literally been on the call for 15 or 20 minutes. At a point that I feel comfortable, I'll say, I'm going to ask you a really hard question. And if you're okay with that, and they say yes, I asked the hard question. They're like, oh yeah, that solved everything. And I don't hear from them ever again.
And that's a win.
And that's a win.
Yeah.
That's totally a win, because what they just needed someone to say the thing that they've been thinking about, that they know in their heart, but everyone else is saying, oh yeah, but no, that's not really true.
Yeah. So to that point, you actually did a great job of explaining what the clarity calls are. But what I would say is that clarity calls in general, and I've sat in on enough of them to know this is true, is they're not about convincing you to blow everything up. They're not about telling you what you have to do. It's really just helping you figure out what business decisions work for the life you want. And if you want to book that appointment with Gwen, you just go to everydayeffectiveness.com/clarity. And like she said, she may never hear from you again. She's totally okay with that. It's not a sales pitch. It's simply a conversation to figure out what the best next step is for you, so that you don't wake up the day after hating your business, because nobody wins when you're miserable. Thanks for tuning in to The Business You Really Want with Gwen Bortner. I'm Tonya Kubo, reminding you that sustainable success is within reach. Make sure to subscribe to the show and visit thebusinessyoureallyWant.com for more resources. Until next time, keep dreaming big and acting with intention.